start that. Okay.
All right, thank you, Dr. Carey. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nin Kine. I'm the acting director here at the Office of Human Rights, and I'm pleased to be here. Welcome to our very first listening lab of the new fiscal year. We've been doing a few of these in the last fiscal year, but this will be the first one for FY23. So if you've never been to one of our listening labs, I just want to take a moment to explain what it is. It's essentially how it sounds. We want to be here to listen to you, the community members, about concerns you may have. And of course, the focus for tonight is disability discrimination. And so we welcome your thoughts, and Dr. Carey, as well as our team, is going to be here to help you converse in these issues and concerns through breakout sessions. So, of course, as you know, October is a National Disability Employment Awareness Month. To commemorate this designation, each October, usually the Department of Labor takes up the effort to celebrate many contributions of people with disabilities in America's workplaces and economy. At the local level here in the district, the Office of Human Rights too would like to celebrate the contributions of people with disabilities who live, work, and visit Washington, D.C. As we celebrate many contributions, though, we must also bear in mind and acknowledge the challenges that still exist for people with disabilities, especially with respect to being a meaningful part of our labor force. I can tell you that in FY21, disability was among the top 3 cited protected traits in employment discrimination. Now, that does not necessarily mean that disability is the most prevalent discrimination in DC, but it does mean that we need to work together as a community to bring about better understanding of how we can support our disability community. And one of those ways that we can support our communities is to talk about one of the key challenges of our times, which is accessible, reliable transportation. And so we've invited some of our government agency partners, including DDOT, Department for Hire Vehicles, Office of Disability Rights, and others to hear your concerns. And again, how we can improve as a community in supporting our disability community. We also have, thanks to Dr. Mia Carey, have a phenomenal keynote speaker, Ola Ojewumi. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. I hope to be able to correct it if I have, whom Mia will introduce. But she is an activist and just a force to reckon with, I believe. And she is going to talk and share about her experiences in disability discrimination realm as well. So I hope you enjoyed this evening. And I see that I should also acknowledge and recognize our chair, Motoko Azawa, who is the chair of our Commission on Human Rights, who is here with us this evening. So I will not take up too much of your time because we have a packed agenda for this evening, but I just wanted to welcome everyone. Thank you, the community, for being here, trusting us with listening to you in the concerns and challenges that you faced. I want to thank our keynote speaker as well as my team for putting together this platform. I hope you enjoy it, and we will certainly take any feedback and comments you may have about this program. Thank you, Dr. Carey.
Thank you, Director Kime. If I can proceed. So before we get started, I just wanted to go over some few housekeeping tips. Please keep your mic silenced when you are not speaking. That way we can hear everybody clearly and that we don't get any kind of interference with the closed captioning. If you have a question at any point, please raise your virtual hand or use the chat feature. There are several members of the OHR team who are monitoring the chat and can uplift something if I miss it. We also want to say respect each other and each other's time. We know that the topic at hand may be a little controversial or more maybe bring about a lot of emotion. So we just want to be mindful of that. And then finally, we just want to remind you to ask the hard questions, listen, and engage. So the run-up show, I'm gonna introduce our keynote speaker, Ola Ojewumi, and then we're gonna go into a breakout room for about 20 minutes. I'll talk a little bit about how these will work shortly. We'll do group discussion for a few minutes, and then the bulk of our time together will be on our panel discussion, and then we'll wrap up around 6:30, 6:35. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Office of Human Rights and the protections we offer for people with disabilities. So our mission at the Office of Human Rights is to eradicate discrimination, increase equal opportunity, and protect human rights. We have two arms, the proactive arm and the responsive. On our proactive side, we conduct educational campaigns. We advocate for the practice of good human relations and mutual understanding. We also oversee the implementation of various compliance programs, such as CRISP and language access. On our responsive side, we investigate, prosecute, and adjudicate complaints filed under the DC Human Rights Act of 1977, in addition to other local and federal statutes and laws. So we will protect residents, commuters, and visitors in the district. Our jurisdiction includes the DC government and the private sector. It does not include the federal government, including Metro and Momata or DC courts. We cover 4 areas: educational institutions. And as you can see, this is kind of grayed out compared to the other ones. And this is because we don't get as many complaints about educational institutions. Employment, housing, and public accommodations. This year, we added the 22nd and 23rd protected trait, which is homeless status and sealed conviction records. So you'll learn more about those in the coming months, but there are now 23 protected traits under the DC Human Rights Act of 1977, making the human rights law one of the most comprehensive laws in the United States. So disability under the Human Rights Act is defined as a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more life activities and includes those living with HIV and AIDS. As a reminder, disability is not just physical. It can be auditory, cognitive, learning, neurological, related to speech, or visual. It can also be invisible. Invisible disabilities are those that you might not be readily apparent to the naked eye, which includes a lot of auditory, cognitive learning or neurological, or visual impairments. So under the Human Rights Act, we provide a number of protections for people with disabilities. As an employer in the district, you must provide reasonable accommodation for employees whose ability to work is limited due to a disability. Reasonable accommodations can include things like an ergonomic chair, a standing desk, leave, an interpreter, or a flexible work schedule. An employer also cannot enforce an employee to take leave if a reasonable accommodation can be provided. Now, if you take any of our other trainings, you'll learn that the same standards that apply for pregnancy also apply for disability in terms of requirements. Now, there are 4 elements of a claim we look for when there is a disability complaint. The first is that the complainant is disabled within the meaning of the act. Second, the employer was aware of the disability. Third, the employee could perform the essential functions of their position with reasonable accommodations. And fourth, the employee requested and was denied a reasonable accommodation. So if you do feel like you have been discriminated against, you can come to our office and file a complaint, unless you are a government employee, and then you would have to go through the EEO process. But if you are a member of the community, you can visit ohr.dc.gov/service/file a discrimination complaint, and your complaint form will be under employment. Now, this is a simplified process for filing a claim, but I did just want to let you know what that complaint process looks like. So the first step would be to file a complaint or go through intake, which begins with filing that form. You'll then go through mediation. If mediation fails, then their investigation will occur, and then you'll go through conciliation. There'll be a public evidentiary hearing, and then there will be a final decision. Now, this is a simplified process, and because the nature of each case is different, this case could extend for different amounts of time for different people. But because we are talking about transportation today, you can file a complaint against taxi drivers and taxi companies, also for vehicle for hire. So if you are a person with disability, a taxi driver or vehicle for hire company cannot refuse you for having a service animal or having a collapsible wheelchair. And as a reminder, on-duty traditional taxis without a current fare must stop for a potential passenger in a wheelchair and ask if they want a ride. If the taxi is not accessible, the driver must offer to call dispatch and send an accessible cab. I do think there are two accessible taxi cab companies. I think one of them is Royal, and I'll find the other one for you. So if you'd like to file a complaint for traditional taxi drivers or companies, you can visit this website, or for vehicle for hire drivers or companies, you can visit the other website. And if you go to our main website, these websites or resources are listed under filing a complaint.
Hey, Mia, it's the other cab, the other company is actually Yellow Cab. Yeah.
Good, thank you. I knew it was one of them.
Yeah, of course. Sorry,
No worries. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I want to keep us on schedule. So I am going to introduce our keynote speaker, Ola Ojewumi, who is a writer and a disability rights activist. She is also the founder of Sacred Hearts Children's Transplant Foundation and Project Ascend. She initiated these charitable efforts after becoming disabled at age 9. Her organizations have awarded thousands of dollars in college scholarships to disabled students, funded women's education programs, supported global mentorship groups and literacy programs, and distributed teddy bears and books to children awaiting organ transplants. Ola served on boards for nonprofit organizations created by General Colin Powell and musician Lady Gaga. Her work in public policy has gone viral. She recently gave a speech about the importance of fighting the repeal of the Affordable Care Act alongside Senators Cory Booker and Bob Menendez. This speech garnered 3.7 million views on Now This. She has appeared on PBS, C-SPAN, and Democracy Now! As a political commentator. Most recently, she testified before Congress in front of the White House Ways and Means Committee. As a freelance writer, she has written for CNN, NBC News, Glamour, Marie Curie, Self, and the Huffington Post. And without further ado, Ola Ojewumi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carey. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all this evening and to be given the opportunity by the DC Office of Human Rights to share my story with you. Now, this won't be your typical keynote address. It'll be interactive and make you think about your views on disability, civil rights, and transportation equity. Now, I want everyone to think back to when you were in elementary school, when you were in the 5th grade. What were your thoughts on disability? Did you know any disabled kids your age? Did you interact with anyone regularly with a disability or a disabled adult in your family or in your friend group? In my 9-year-old juvenile mind, I thought disability was a result of bad karma. I believed that you had to have done something wrong to end up in a wheelchair until I became disabled that very year. I didn't know that I secretly had a rare heart condition. Though I didn't become a wheelchair user immediately, that diagnosis would change my life forever. In less than 2 years, I'd wake up in a children's hospital thousands of miles away from DC. And at the tender age of 11 years old, I was told I had a heart kidney transplant. A few days after surgery, I'd be asked to start walking again, only for the doctors to discover that one of my lungs collapsed and I had nerve damage in my right leg. I'd eventually appear to walk normally for several years after that. My disability was hidden for almost a decade before needing to become a wheelchair user at age 20. When you're a kid and placed on the organ transplant waiting list, they don't tell you that there's a possibility that you may develop cancer because of the lifelong immunosuppressive therapy to keep your body from rejecting your organs. So I became a cancer survivor after that. Simply because you think that disability will never happen to you doesn't mean it won't. Disability or becoming a wheelchair user isn't a result of karma. You should care about the civil rights of people with disabilities because we are one and the same. If you intend to live to old age, you will naturally develop any number of disabilities as the human body ages, This can range from high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, or any medical condition. This is my reality, but it may become yours. Disability justice is a matter we should all care about because I am you and you are me. I became a disability rights activist because it took a long time and becoming chronically ill to see how unequal society treats disabled people. Despite my disability being hidden for a decade, I was still in deep denial about being disabled because I didn't look like it. I struggled to walk short distances and had disability accommodations from elementary school to high school. But in my head, I wasn't disabled. I guarantee you that there are people on this call with hidden chronic conditions who don't classify themselves as disabled, but they may change their tune at the end of this listening session. Disability just doesn't come in the form of a wheelchair, a walker, or a cane. However, once I became a wheelchair user, the barriers disabled people experience in employment and transportation became ever present to me. I experienced this firsthand when inaccessible transportation led me to miss a major professional opportunity on Capitol Hill. As an activist, I fought against the repeal of the Affordable Care Act as a beneficiary of it. I could stay on my parents' health insurance and have my cancer treatment covered because of the ACA. I was invited to speak alongside Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, about how the ACA saved my life. However, I couldn't get an accessible Uber, Lyft, or cab to travel to Capitol Hill from my home to the rally. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity slipped from my hands simply because I use a wheelchair. Many people think being disabled makes life hard, but it's how people treat you and the structural barriers in place that makes it challenging. Living in an inaccessible world frustrates my disabled peers and me more than having disabilities. Transportation inequity is a result of many stereotypes that disabled people do not work or attend college, we don't leave our homes, we don't have personal or professional lives, and we rely on public assistance to survive. We don't live independently with family or in institutions or public housing. There's nothing wrong with using these necessary, often government-sponsored services. Still, they exist partly due to institutional discrimination that blocks disabled people from employment, higher education, and overall independence. Did you know that it's legal in the United States to pay disabled people below minimum wage? The Department of Labor defines this as sub-minimum wage. Our labor isn't even of equal value to our non-disabled coworkers, despite having the same qualifications and performing the same duties. This is defined as ableism. Access Living further defines it as the discrimination and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. At its heart, ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing and defines people by their disability. Like racism, sexism, ableism, and classifies an entire group of people as less than. This includes assumptions and myths that the government is paying disabled people to stay home instead of choosing to work. In reality, those on disability are encouraged to work, but not permitted to have more than $2,000 in their bank account, or their benefits and healthcare through Medicare or Medicaid will be revoked. Many disabled people may never experience milestones like purchasing a home or getting married because their disability benefits will be taken away because of ableism affirmed and codified by the government. In addition to asset restrictions, disabled people are barred from joining the military, though many people in the military eventually become disabled. We disabled people first learn about combating ableism in our homes. My parents and many parents of disabled people informed their loved ones in childhood of how tough it will be to survive in a society where disabled people are discarded and treated as disposable. This inspired me to try and beat the system and prove everyone wrong that disability doesn't destroy your life. In high school, I lobbied the school board to improve accessibility policies for disabled students. In college, I founded a nonprofit called Project Ascend that awards college scholarships to disabled youth. I did 6 internships. I was a public policy fellow at Berkeley, and Glamour magazine named me among the top 10 most influential college women in the United States. I interned in the Obama White House and for Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. When graduation came, I thought offers would be rolling in. I applied for job after job, and still I couldn't secure employment. Employers didn't see me. They saw my disability first and my resume last. So finding a job took nearly a year. And when I got one, it wasn't in my field. I was hired through a centralized program that recruited people with disabilities. I watched people that I had graduated college with prosper, get promotions, have big fancy titles, while I was stuck in this dead end, go nowhere job because I needed the health insurance benefits and job stability that came with it. Though my career has grown, since then, this isn't the reality for all disabled people. I was one of the lucky ones. 21.3% of disabled Americans are working and actively looking for work. We want to work. It's just that employers refuse to hire us. We may never know the actual number of people with disabilities who are employed because there are so few people willing to identify as disabled out of fear of discrimination in the workplace or simply denial and internalized ableism that has taught them that identifying as disabled means you're giving in, you're succumbing to your illness, when there's nothing wrong with being disabled. The minute you own that title, you own the rights that come with it, and you're able to advocate for yourself and not submit to a workforce that says you are less valuable. Simply put, many disabled people face huge barriers to employment, which includes lack of transportation, lack of education, loss of government assistance, and employer coworker attitudes and needs for accommodations. Employers may not be able to remedy all these issues, but they can intervene and stop ableist policies and practices in the workplace. Employers should focus on what disabled employees can do and not what they can't. Recognize that accommodating a disabled employee is not going to bankrupt your business. On average, an accommodation costs less than $500. Disabled employees bring unique perspectives and innovation, and statistically, we have a higher retention rate with good employers. If you live and work in the DC area, you may notice there are several visibly and noticeably disabled people employed here. Disabled people tend to flock to Washington, DC because there are more work opportunities per se, and it appears that we have an accessible transportation system. Though the metro bus and rail system and paratransit system are incredibly fractured and mismanaged. They've moved here because the US federal government has employed a record number of disabled people. Obama once set a goal through his Schedule A hiring authority and executive order of employing over 100,000 people with disabilities into the federal government. The government does this to influence the private sector to follow suit. So similar to how during the civil rights movement, the government started expanding opportunities to Black people and started to try and desegregate the federal government, it was to show the private sector the government is doing this, so you must follow suit. Before praising the federal government for its diversity and inclusion record, it has a high turnover rate for disabled employees. They're rarely given supervisor or managerial roles. And many of them leave the federal government. Whether you work in the public or private sector, ask yourself, have you ever in life had a manager or boss who was openly disabled? And when I say openly, I don't mean that their disability is visible. I mean someone who says I'm disabled, who can talk about it freely without restriction or without shame. That has yet to happen to me. If your answer is no, you've never worked for anyone with a disability, then you know yourself that there are limited opportunities for upward mobility for people with disabilities in the workforce. Discrimination based on disability within the federal government, it's increased. The EEO complaints from disabled employees have increased from 22% to 72% between 2014 and 2018. Now that's telling you something. In the years that we've had this big hiring push to bring more disabled people into the workforce, there's been rampant discrimination and a push to keep them out. I have several disabled colleagues who work for the federal government, one of whom is deaf. And he was dismissed from his federal job after less than a year. After a year, he would have certain protections, but the day before his 1 year mark, he was fired. And he was even told in an email months before that he was irresponsible with his interpreters and it was costing the federal government money. This is blatant discrimination in writing. And do you want to guess the end result after he filed an EEO complaint? He got a settlement. It's $1,500. And this is the reality of disabled federal workers. Simply because there are large numbers of people working in the federal government doesn't mean they're being given equal opportunity and are not being pushed out. The Americans with Disabilities Act made tremendous strides in creating rights against employment discrimination based on disability and mandating accessible transportation. You know, we have the laws in place, but it doesn't mean the goals and the dreams of the ADA and the, founding fathers and mothers of disability activism have been fulfilled. I've been on the receiving end of employment discrimination in my own personal and previous employment experience. I was told by a supervisor in a conversation, what does your disability have to do with anything? And I don't think you belong in this program. This was despite favorable performance reviews and winning a national award for my service. It doesn't matter how good you are, you cannot overcome or overachieve institutionalized ableism on your own as a disabled person. It takes the work of those in power, meaning non-disabled people with power and privilege that they are often unwilling to check or recognize. For disabled people, it's not simply about retaining a job amidst over discrimination. It's about how we can get to work and keep our jobs. Disabled residents of DC need transportation equity to get to work and have a fulfilling and meaningful life outside of employment. The DC metro area has been praised and criticized for its accessible rail system. In many parts of the nation, like New York City, every subway station doesn't have an elevator, but the metro here in DC does. However, elevator and escalator outages are a constant burden to disabled passengers, and we are expected to wait in the cold and blistering heat for a metro to send a bus to take us to another accessible metro station if the elevator does not work at that metro station that we went to. This adds so much time to your transportation route, and it's not fair, and it's to me blatant discrimination if I can't get to somewhere at the same rate or at the same time period as someone else, because I have meetings, I have a job to get to, I have speaking engagements, I have medical appointments. Why should my quality of life be diminished because your system is unable to maintain its elevators? Often metro buses have issues with ramps, don't work, bus overcrowding makes it impossible for us wheelchair users to board. And this is unfair. This is an unfair burden that is more than just an inconvenience. It costs us job opportunities. We miss critical medical treatments, and we're not given a chance to have a semblance of a normal everyday life. How can we grocery shop, pick up medication, go to happy hour, a networking event, or a concert? There's this funny tweet that's been made into a meme online about disabled parking. It reads, disabled parking should only be valid during business hours, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I cannot see any reason why a person with genuine disabilities will be out beyond this time. And a disabled person replied, "We're disabled, we're not werewolves." The reality is, many people go their entire lives not interacting with disabled people and sincerely believe that we never leave our homes, or if we do, it's only during business hours, and that we have no lives, no professional obligations, no duties. And it's hilarious because, the minute I got my wheelchair, I previously couldn't leave my house that much because of my walking limitations. But once I got that chair, I put it in high speed. I rolled out. I was everywhere in this city. I was on the hill. I was I was in college too, so I was at parties too. I was living everyday life, and my wheelchair gave me access. It didn't restrict my freedom. The only thing restricting my freedom was the metro. In addition to being an activist and a full-time student, I was still a person. I just had a disability. There's a common misconception that we're trapped because we want to be, but it's the limited accessible transportation options and the poor infrastructure in the city. This makes traveling down the street a hazard due to broken curb cuts, buildings we can't enter because of historic preservation. We don't have enough voice crosswalks to inform blind pedestrians of when they can cross the street. Georgetown is a literal death trap for wheelchair users due to all that cobblestone. I mean, U Street is a poppin' area, and it still has inaccessible concert venues barring disabled music fans from entry. DC prides itself on its accessible taxi cab service. They are known not to respond to requests via rideshare apps. And I've had accessible cab drivers reject me as a customer, claiming they didn't know how to work the ramp. I wasn't buying it. I told them I learned about the 2-week training program that they were required to participate in to become an accessible taxi cab driver. So now you're going to roll out the ramp, you're going to let me in, and you're going to stop lying so you don't have to interact with a disabled person because you feel like it's too much work to do the job you were hired to do. They fail to honor their commitment to the people they're assigned to work with. One of the few places where you can get an accessible cab is Reagan Airport, or if you're lucky, Union Station. I travel a lot on business trips and a lot via train to New York and different cities. There have been many times where I've been unable to secure a ride home because of a few accessible cabs. Things became so difficult for me, I began to air my grievances on social media. Rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft are no different. For non-disabled people to get an Uber or Lyft, they can get it in less than 10 minutes. Disabled people in the district, we don't have this luxury. Though I will say this, presently, Lyft is fighting against disability rights groups that are asking that they provide accessible transportation options because legally they have to under the ADA. Though expanding its market would make millions for Lyft, they are resisting and would rather spend millions of dollars fighting this. Uber was in similar lawsuits and they eventually just gave in. But their wheelchair service has been completely unreliable. It's taken many of me and my disabled peers 30 minutes to 2 hours just to get an accessible Uber, if you can get one at all. Suppose these drivers accept your ride request at all. I become frustrated at the service and I became frustrated at the long waiting period that I have to cancel the ride. I've missed many, many opportunities because of this. Eventually a law firm reached out to me and asked that I submit an affidavit to testify against Uber and its discrimination against its customers in the area. I have friends who use manual wheelchairs and the Uber drivers refuse to accept their ride. The minute they see them, they end the trip, refuse to put the wheelchair in the trunk. This is a part of their job, as independent contractors for Uber. It's a requirement. You don't have the right to discriminate against passengers, but people don't see this as discrimination. They see disability and disabled passengers as a burden. I've been stranded in DC and had to stay with friends in hotels because I couldn't come home with the rideshare apps and inaccessible public transit. When DC residents ask for better infrastructure and public transportation that they pay for, we're told to use alternatives like the bus or the paratransit system, i.e. Metro Access. A few years back, I attended a concert at the Fillmore. I scheduled for Metro Access to pick me up at 11 p.m. At the time, I was a young woman in my 20s. I'm in my 30s now. And I sat out in my wheelchair waiting for Metro Access to pick me up until after 1 a.m. I called and they sent someone all the way from Virginia to come get me at 1 o'clock in the morning. This was ridiculous. Their remedy and apology was a refund of the $7 I spent on the trip. It was a literal threat to my safety and well-being as a disabled woman in that area alone at night, because Metro Access is not only unreliable, they do not care about their disabled clientele. Metro Access operates an archaic system where you have to book your ride a day before 4 p.m. After 4 p.m., you can't change your destination or drop-off location. What happens if you're released from the hospital and don't have a ride home? What if you need to stay at dialysis longer and your Metro Access driver isn't willing to wait because they only have to wait for 15 minutes before they can leave? Or what if you have to go to a meeting across town? It's not feasible to expect disabled people to plan their lives a day before because things happen. And this is structural inequality that non-disabled people do not have to deal with. Folks believe access to reliable transportation is a personal matter when transportation equity and accessibility are civil rights to which taxpayers are entitled to. Transportation is more than a luxury, but life or death for disabled people who need to get to chemotherapy, surgeries, medical appointments, procedures, and other treatments. Paratransit services are one of the few affordable options, and it has created more instability over the years. Metro Access is frequently late, they don't show up, and they have multiple controversies. For example, disabled women passengers on Metro Access are not safe from sexual violence of the drivers. The Washington Post has reported on some drivers having been prosecuted for rape and sexual assault against disabled women. How am I to feel safe in a vehicle and within a system where disabled women's safety is not a priority, but protecting the interests of the company and protecting, sexual predators from ever experiencing consequences because the company doesn't want to be liable? One of the problems being that people don't believe disabled women can be raped. We are seen as asexual and undesirable, when in reality, statistically, disabled women are more likely to be sexually assaulted than non-disabled women. From my personal experience, I've been hit on by many Metro Access drivers, and a few of them have asked me on dates, but this is only because I was one of the few women who was in her early 20s, mid-20s using the service. I will say this, it was completely unprofessional, but it was also scary because these people also knew where I lived. So it's not just unprofessional, it's a threat to safety. The service has a history of hiring drivers who act inappropriately with women. I can sit here all day and talk to you about the many challenges disabled people face, or we can talk about potential solutions. In the past, protests and lawsuits have been utilized to enforce anti-discrimination policies against disabled people. The answer isn't to force disabled people who already have limited incomes to sue, or disability rights groups to continue to sue. Employers, state, and local governments can act proactively to change things. During the COVID-19 pandemic, local DC government created mask mandates within rideshare services to enforce people wearing masks for the safety of others. Why can't the same be done to enforce the ADA regarding rideshare services in DC with Uber and Lyft? Employers can take a stand and expand their workforce to include more disabled employees. And looking to what the government has done, even though the government has failed in many areas. But they do have information about how to hire disabled people through affirmative action programs like Schedule A or workforce recruitment. Learn from the good that the government has done, but not the bad. Offer disabled people fair wages. Stop hiring disabled people to solely work in janitorial services, housekeeping, and factories, and not in jobs with upward mobility or promotions. The most brilliant minds you have ever seen reside in the bodies of disabled people. Disabled women friends of mine inspire me, like Haben Girma. She's the first deaf and blind graduate of Harvard Law School. One of my mentors, her name is Claudia Gordon. She's in the area, and she's the first deaf Black woman attorney in the United States. She also worked in the Obama White House as the Associate Director of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs. There's another woman who has mentored me. We both went to the same school. She graduated with a PhD from my alma mater. Her name is Dr. Angel Miles. And being surrounded by these powerful Black women with disabilities showed me that anything is possible, but that the world is sleeping on disabled people and not seeing the talent within these brilliant bodies. There's an untapped and astounding pool of brilliant disabled people with talent that employers pass over for less qualified, non-disabled people. We are the largest minority in the US. There are 65 million of us, and we comprise 19% of the nation's population. In Washington, D.C., disabled people are 11% of the city's population. We are a large and mighty tribe of people who've been ignored for far too long. These critical conversations need to happen because the fight for disability rights should not just be on the shoulders of the disabled. As a collective, we can end or close the disability wage gap by ending disability employment discrimination and fixing broken infrastructure and inaccessible transit. These are all interconnected with affordable housing and pulling disabled people out of poverty and into the workforce and giving them stability that they have earned and been denied. Please don't wait until you, a family member, or a loved one becomes disabled for you to care and fight for disabled lives. Never in a million years did I think that I would ever end up in a wheelchair. As you can see from my life, I've always been a fighter. You know, I fought cancer and I fought to stay alive despite doctors saying that I would only live to see age 20. And I am now 31 years old. And I'll be celebrating the 20th anniversary of my heart and kidney transplant in less than a month. It's been a battle, I'm not gonna lie, but we members of the disabled community have fought for things that have improved the lives of able-bodied people, not just for ourselves. We have fought for decades for workplace flexibility, working from home, telecommuting, you know, even the Affordable Care Act guaranteeing health insurance for people with pre-existing conditions like pregnancy and premature birth. No matter how ridiculous that sounds, those were considered pre-existing conditions. Don't view equal rights for disabled people as charity. It's justice. We are your equals, not to be pitied and not a charity case. Don't do this work because you think you're helping us. That's not the situation. In order to be a true advocate for justice, you need to see those people you're supposedly helping as your equals. We are not to be looked down upon, but celebrated. We are proud of our disabilities, not ashamed. Disabled does not mean deficient. Don't count us out, rather count us in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. That was great. So we're gonna switch gears a little bit. Instead of doing breakout groups, since we do have such a small group, what I wanted to do was just leave it open for discussion for the community to share their stories. If you'd like to uplift something that Ola mentioned, we'll do this for the next like 20 minutes or so, and then I'll stop recording so that whatever you share is confidential. So jump in when you're ready. And then you can ask. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Becca, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, once the agencies or partner organizations introduce themselves, I'll open it up for questions for the community.
All right.
All
Hi,
right.
good evening, everyone. This is Zachary Smith. I'm with the District Department of Transportation. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So one of my responsibilities is to promote equity within the agency, which we define as the fair distribution of resources for residents, visitors, and commuters. In addition to that, I'm also the liaison between DDOT and our Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Council, which is a district council for persons with disabilities who are interested in the transportation space and to discuss issues as they come up. But a little bit about DDOT. Our mission is to equitably deliver a safe, sustainable, and reliable multimodal transportation network for all. Along with our mission, we do acknowledge in our equity statement that inequities do exist, especially within the transportation network. And we are working every day to reduce and eliminate those inequities, especially for our historically under-resourced groups, which include persons with disabilities. And so we are continuing those efforts every day as we examine our regulations and our policies around barriers in the public right of way. So really simply, all that is to say that we are the agency that you come to when it comes to potholes on the streets, any sort of issues with the sidewalks that need repair, roadway markings, traffic signals, things like that. Our agency handles those issues. The best way to sort of bring those to our attention is to dial 311. Which is our government system that collects all of this information, and we send out a team to deal with it. In addition to that, we do have a grievance form that I can actually put in the chat here for folks to use if there is an ADA issue within the public right-of-way that needs attention from us. Beyond that, we do manage things like the residential disability parking program. And this is reserved space in front of people's homes if you have any sort of mobility impairment. We're looking to expand that program in the near future. Right now, it's only available for folks in single-family homes. We want to do a program that's available for folks who live in multifamily homes or apartment buildings or condos, what have you. One of our other initiatives is our pickup drop-off zones. And that's essentially the areas with no parking, no standing unless you are loading and unloading a passenger. We're really reevaluating that this year because there has been a lot of increased attention for the curbside and curb space when you have Uber Eats and Lyft drivers dropping off. And so we want to make sure that we still focus on our priority, which is our people and residents and commuters and things of that nature. So that's all I wanted to bring up. I'm happy to take any questions that you have for DDOT or any issues that you may be facing. Again, and I'll drop my contact info into the chat as well. And feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions.
Thanks, Zach. We'll switch to Kirk.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. I apologize. I am double booked at another event at the moment, so I'm kind of on the breakout side of the session at the moment. So if you hear any background noise, please let me know, and I'll try to isolate it as much as necessary as possible. My name is Kirk Dobson. I am the Chief Performance Officer at the Department of For-Hire Vehicles. I'm joined today with my colleague, Charles Davis. Charles, are you online? So I'm going to share my screen, if possible, just to show you a rundown of some of our programs that we have. Give me 1 second. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So Charles, do you just want to introduce Transport DC as our first program, and I'll go through the rest?
Sure. So Charles Davis, Program Manager, happy to be here. I want to first acknowledge Director McCullough. It was very nice meeting you yesterday at the expo. I appreciate you very much. And I want to acknowledge Miss Ola again, because not only did you educate me on various issues, you also inspired me a lot, Miss Ola. So thank you again. And one thing that you did bring up, Ola, was Metro Access. And at the top of the list here, we have Transport DC. And so this is an alternative to Metro Access. If you have a Metro Access ID, you can use Transport DC, which will send a taxi cab to you. It will send, upon request, a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Ola, you mentioned the disturbing policy that of booking a day in advance. You said that it didn't help it was very difficult with your schedule, but Transport DC doesn't have the booking a day in advance. And with this program, you would get 10 free one-way trip, not free, 10 one-way trips a month for $7. It's a very accessible and convenient program.
So I'm going to interrupt really quick. We have a comment in the chat about whether or not you can use Transport DC if you live in Maryland.
I'm sorry. So Transport DC is to and from any location in the district.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Charles. So just going through some of our other programs, I'll just give a kind of a brief overview. So our second program listed here is Vets Ride. Vets Ride is really aimed at our military veterans who have basically transportation needs within the district, once again. And so we'll pick off and drop off for any purpose. There's no limitation on the amount of rides or where they go. And so it's a really good program for our vets. Our Promise Ride program, the next program listed here, is for recently, and by the way, Charles manages all these programs. So Charles, feel free to jump in if I'm not saying enough. You are the expert par excellence on all of these, so please feel free. But our Promise Ride program is for our brothers and sisters who have been recently incarcerated and are currently back out to reintegrate into the community, so returning citizens. And basically, we also make sure to get rides for them, especially for employment purposes, education purposes, and things of that nature. The restrictions on the travel zones are a little bit more broad here. So it's not only the district, but there's some flexibility here. But Charles can go into that if there's any questions. Number 4 on the list is DC Neighborhood Connect. So if you live in Ward 8 east of the river, or parts of the northwest or northeast DC and Ivy City, you are able to get rides to and from. It's a microtransit program that gives door-to-door service from your residence or from wherever you need to be picked up to any place you need to go. There's really not many restrictions there. For more details on the map and the availability, please visit our website at dfhv.dc.gov. Make sure to put that in the chat as well. And then in addition to that, we have our My Rides program. Our My Rides program is really tailored for folks who are also supported by the Department of Behavioral Health, DBH. And so it's for people who need help for getting to treatment and to other medical needs and other appointments as deemed necessary by DBH. And finally, listed here is our non-emergency medical transportation, our non-emergency medical transportation program, which basically, if someone in the district if someone calls 911 and an ambulance is dispatched, they will evaluate the person for level of need and trauma care. And if the person is deemed to be sufficiently healthy enough to be transported by alternative means, they will engage this program to transport the person to the hospital or to other care centers as needed. So that's just an overview of some of our major programs here. And Charles, do you have anything you want to add?
No, sir. No.
Thank you. So we are here for any questions. Just really quick, also, our agency is responsible for the oversight of what we call our national transportation carriers, so Uber, Lyfts, as well as the taxis and limos within the District of Columbia. So we have oversight of that as well. So any questions you have related to those kind of services, we can also take at this time.
Thank you.
Or
Do
as
we have
Maya,
No worries.
or as Maya dictates.
Any other partner agencies want to jump on before we open up for questions?
I just want to add that I put my email address and cell phone in the chat in case there's any follow-ups to those programs.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any questions? Anybody want to share an experience? Kind of opening the floor at the moment.
Yeah, maybe if anyone else wants to share, please go ahead. I've already shared a little bit, but I wanted to kind of mention our bus network. Our bus network's kind of the lifeblood of our transit system in the district, and our buses are by far the most accessible, most sustainable, and most equitable form of transit that we have in that we have across any form of transit. But so often we have our bus system is being relegated to a second class type operation. So take for example the bus number 70 or 79. It is the busiest route in the district that goes up 7th and Georgia. And very often those bus stops are being blocked by government vehicles. And I ride this bus personally to come up to Howard every day. And I've seen personally wheelchair riders have to come into the street in order to board the bus. And then they would have to go into the street out back and then go to another curb cut in order to board the bus. And that is just beyond blood boiling to me. It's just like, if we care about really making DC's transit system accessible, we have to start with the government. There really needs to be a cultural shift where people realize, hey, like the bus is our lifeblood. We need to treat that like the king of the street. It can't be that some police officer wants to get, it's a true story, wants to get Starbucks so they can park in the bus lane and go get their coffee and then come back and go sit in their car. Like that type of behavior and that type of culture is so wildly frustrating and it really just needs to come from the top down. I've seen the mayor's detail actually park in the bus lane, and it's just like our bus lanes need to be on every arterial street and road in our district, and also they need to be kept clear, especially by government vehicles. So anyway, I just wanted to share that.
If I can add to what Karthik just said, so part of the responsibility of the Department of For-Hire Vehicles, I'm not sure if anyone really sees us a lot. You'll see us, but not really recognize us. So our enforcement team have those blue cars, no sirens on top, but we do have authority to pull over and clear those lanes. That's from time to time, especially as part of the Mayor's Vision Zero initiative. We do try to keep that clear. So if you ever see our agents around, our enforcement officers around, they're called VIOs. Our VIOs can help and assist in clearing those lanes, even of our counterparts in government. So please, reach out if you see them in the streets, especially if it's Uber driver, Uber Lyft driver or taxi that's blocking any kind of way or any kind of access point. We are responsible for making sure to enforce those rules. So please keep that in mind as you go around the district. And we're in those blue cars. They say DFHB on the side. They're really cool. So Thank you.
Thank you. Would others like to share?
If I could just take a quick moment just to say hello to to Director McCullough and say thank you for having DFHV represent here today. I'm not sure if he remembers, but I also used to work at the Department of Disability Services. So we go back quite a ways back. So it's nice to see you again. And Maya, I wanted to thank you for putting this together. You did a fantastic job with this. So I appreciate all the work you do for the community.
So I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. If you'd like to stay on and continue talking, or you have questions you want to have, I'll stay on till 7:30. But if you have to go, please feel free to do that. I know we're cutting into dinner time and people worked all day. And if you were at the Disability Expo today, that's great. We're hoping we're able to do more disability related events here at OHR. If you have questions or thoughts that come up, I will drop my email into the chat. If you want to know more about the inclusive language guide that I mentioned earlier, please feel free to reach out and then I'll put you on our listserv. So when that information is ready, you'll be the first to hear about it.
I want to add one final point. So, as some of you know, WMATA oversees the metro system and the buses. So just realize that in terms of WMATA, they are not under the district government, unfortunately. They are an independent agency that's responsible for reporting back to the United States Congress. I would also preface that we also have, an advisory board, and more of the DC residents with disabilities should serve on that advisory board because more or less our voices are not being heard on a very consistent basis. And so I would encourage our district residents with disabilities that rely on WMATA services heavily, and they are also responsible for the paratransit system in the DC metropolitan area too. So a lot of the disparities that you hear in terms of the metro system having the elevators be out, paratransit being late constantly, all the services are operated by WMATA, and I don't think WMATA is held accountable enough. Granted, they've been going through a lot of transition leadership. That should send you a message that something is definitely not going right within WMATA. And the fact that services are breaking down and stuff, that impacts everybody, not only people with disabilities, but people with disabilities need to be a little more vocal and involved on these various advisory councils that WMATA has. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll boost that. I'll boost that too. I'll boost that too. I mean, I think in order to make our bus system work for DC's residents, especially DC's disabled residents like us, I think there needs to be much tighter collaboration. So like when we've got bus lanes that are striped, like 7th, that have the red thermoplastic on, like 7th in Georgia, and now like H and I and the new Penn Ave Southeast bus lanes, like those really need, like, that the only way that those are actually useful is if DDOT prioritizes them and DPW prioritizes them and MPD prioritizes them to be kept clear. And I think, you know, we need way more of them. You know, like even the fact that the 7th Street car-free lanes that DDOT effort was killed, you know, that was an implicit prioritization of parking over the mobility of DC's residents who rely on the bus. And, you know, folks with disabilities are twice as likely to not own a car. And basically every time we prioritize parking over mobility and transit, we are being inequitable and we are being ableist. And that's something that I think we really need a whole government discretion on.
Thank you for uplifting that. So on the screen, you see a link to subscribe to our newsletters. So we will be hosting a listening lab in the future, probably before the end of the year. So subscribe so you can learn more about the listening labs and our trainings. So we do offer a human rights liaison training program, which talks about the journey, DC's journey to becoming a human rights city and the work that we've done. It also talks a lot more about the 23 protected traits, about how to file a complaint and what discrimination looks like under the HRA and several of the other laws that we have. So if you're interested in any of that, please feel free to subscribe or email me directly. My email is in the chat. Again, I just want to say thank you to everybody who came out to honor and celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month. We will be hosting more events around disability in the future, but I do appreciate everybody coming out and listening. If you have thoughts, we will send out a survey here shortly, but if no one has final thoughts, I just want to say thank you and good evening again.
Thank you.
Hey, you rock.